Good evening. You're watching India First. I'm Gaurav Sawant. US President Donald Trump is speaking at the United Nations General Assembly. And for the nth time, he's claimed that he ended 7 wars in just over 7 months of his presidency. He's claimed credit for ending 7 unendable wars, as he described them, emphasizing his role in global peace efforts. One of the 7 wars, he said, was also the war between India and Pakistan. Do this job. He listed out the 7 wars when he said Cambodia, Thailand, Kosovo, Serbia, Congo, Rwanda, Pakistan, India, Israel, Iran, and Armenia, Azerbaijan are the wars that he ended. He, of course, has emphasized on his foreign policy initiative and narrative, which he insists focuses extensively on reducing American military involvement overseas. Before I get you more on this big story, let's listen in to US President Donald Trump at the UN.
It's not making Russia look good. Likewise, in a period of just 7 months, I have ended 7 unendable wars. They said they were unendable. You're never going to get them solved. Some were going for 31 years, 2 of them, 31, think of it, 31 years. One was 36 years. One was 28 years. I ended 7 wars. And in all cases, they were raging with countless thousands of people being killed. This includes Cambodia and Thailand, Kosovo and Serbia, the Congo and Rwanda, a vicious, violent war that was, Pakistan and India, Israel and Iran, Egypt and Ethiopia, and Armenia and Azerbaijan. It included all of them.
Now, the big story coming in, the Donald Trump administration is now exploring significant changes on how H-1B visas are issued. Now, the filing that's been submitted in the Office of the Information and Regulatory Affairs, and this has been submitted on the 17th of July, the Department of Homeland Security, or the DHS, it's proposed introducing a weighted selection process for applicants under the cap portion of the H-1B visas. Now, because the number of applicants far outstrips the openings, there was a lottery system that's currently being used to determine who are beneficiaries of the H-1B visas. And India, of all the visas that are issued, 71% beneficiaries are Indians. Now, this change would impact and affect the 85,000 statutorily capped visas and prioritizes factors like a salary or a qualification. Indians who make the majority of H-1B visa recipients may be impacted by this. And I quickly want to cut across to India Today's Foreign Affairs editor, Geeta Mohan, who joins us for more on this. So, Geeta, from the lottery system to the weightage system that will be issued on educational qualifications, on salary caps, what are the changes that are being proposed and how does that impact the H-1B visa seekers in India?
Well, again, we'll have to wait for a detailed explanation. But from what we are seeing and what I gather, Gaurav, it's very clear from the statements that were made earlier by the Trump administration, by senior officials in the Trump administration, and by President Trump himself when he said, we want Americans to get the jobs. Now, what kind of jobs are the Americans going to get? They're going to get the jobs which, because of cheaper labor and skilled labor coming from India, were also occupying the spaces which basically categorized about $65,000 and less income group as well. Now, high-skilled techies from India are not replaceable. They're irreplaceable, very strong assets, not just for India, but particularly for the United States of America. So this H-1B visa that now is capping or weighing the categories will in all probability have to do with the high-skilled, high-paying jobs which will be secured by Indians who are hired for very specific, very high-end jobs and very high-end and high-skilled or high-intensive skills.
Geeta, stay with me for a moment. There's more breaking news coming in from the UNGA address of the US President Donald Trump. It's a big comment on India and China. President Donald Trump says China and India are the main funders of Russia's war on Ukraine. This is President Trump targeting China and India. Now, it remains to be seen whether he also talks about US that continues to import from Russia palladium, fertilizers, and European Union that continues to be the biggest importer of natural gas from Russia and continues to import oil. Or even in his UNGA address, as he blames the United Nations for an escalator that does not work or his teleprompter that was not working, does he only pass the buck blaming China and India and not the European Union and the United States of America? And of course, China remains the biggest importer of Russian oil. I want to once again bring in India Today's Foreign Affairs Editor Geeta Mohan. So Geeta, it's almost like, a template that he's made, whether it's at the White House or in the UN, it's the same speech. Now he says China and India are the biggest funders of Russia's war.
Well, if you look at everything that he said is a reiteration, whether calling United Nations an irrelevant agency, poor, dilapidated, broken, making fun at the United Nations, hurling insults at the United Nations, or for that matter, claiming the 7 unending wars that he ended, and now going ahead and reiterating what he's been saying all along, that India and China are the main funders of the Russia-Ukraine war. Also, more importantly, Gaurav, over here, he's reiterating something that's very important and which Marco Rubio also only a while ago said in an interview, saying that Europe has also been one buying oil from Russia, that they should stop. And secondly, he's insisting that as America has done, so should Europe impose sanctions on countries that are importing oil and gas from Russia. Now, that's an impossible ask because we know that there are countries in Europe who not only take oil or gas from Russia, but also import oil indirectly from India, and that's Russian oil. So, in all probability for Europe, it will be an impossible. But Trump reiterating that in no other place but the United Nations General Assembly Hall is certainly a big news, a big development. Trump upping the ante over here, escalating those tensions that we are seeing between India and the US, not so much between US and China, Gaurav.
And this happens at a time, Geeta, that you have India's External Affairs Minister who's at the UNGA. You have India's Commerce Minister, Piyush Goyal. So you have Dr. Jaishankar and Piyush Goyal at 2 different interactions with the United States. One with the US Secretary of State and the other with the Commerce Secretary and the trade representatives.
Also, the 2 leaders met. Marco Rubio and Dr. Jaishankar had met yesterday in New York ahead of Donald Trump's speech. And the readout, whatever, the brief readout that was put out was about how they're looking at the developments and relations and wanting to move forward. Marco Rubio in an interview today said that yes, that they have levied extra 25% tariff, but they would want to fix it. But in the same breath, also spoke about how not just America, countries in Europe also should start sanctioning other countries to dissuade them from importing Russian oil. So mixed signals coming from Washington. Doesn't seem like they're going to move forward on a thaw in the tense ties between India and the US anytime soon, Gaurav. They do have an
trade negotiations are on. Now, all of these are these levers of negotiation. And Geeta, stay with me, because for the benefit of viewers who are joining us, the India-US trade negotiations, we are being told they're in a crucial phase. Optimist signal progress towards a resolution. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is heading the Indian team. Rajesh Agrawal, Special Secretary in Department of Commerce and the Chief Trade Negotiator. They're already in the US. This follows a visit by the US team led by US Assistant US Trade Representative for South and Central Asia, Brendan Lynch. He'd earlier visited Delhi. However, there are those analysts who say that US President Donald Trump not only imposed the initial 25%, but an additional 25% tariff or sanctions on India for continuing to buy the Russian oil. But he also hit India with a double whammy. First, the revocation of the exemption from sanctions for the Chabahar port, and then the H-1B visa fee hiked to $100,000. This is being seen as a potential negotiation or a negotiating lever. External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar has met US Secretary of State Marco Rubio in New York on the sidelines of UNGA. Jaishankar also met US Ambassador nominee Sergio Gore, who spoke of strengthening bilateral ties. But let me elaborate a bit on this triple whammy. First, the H-1B visa. That's a sudden shock. Trump has ordered a $100,000 fee on every new H-1B visa petition. Now, this order came into effect midnight, September 21. It's the biggest hit on Indian IT firms, which are the largest users, 71% of this entire visa program. Industry experts warn this is a massive cost burden. It threatens both competitiveness and future hirings from India. Now, let me now focus on number two, the Chabahar port sanctions. Again, on the 20th of September, and very quietly, US revoked India's waiver for operations at this very crucial Chabahar port that India and Iran were working on. Now, this waiver that was granted in 2018 had been vital for India's not just trade, but connectivity, not just with Afghanistan, but also with Central Asia and beyond. Now, this reversal, part of Trump's maximum pressure on Iran policy, directly impacts India's strategic interests and India's economic interests and the outreach to the region. The third, the tariffs on exports that we were talking about, the 25% additional tariffs beyond the 25%, the 25% that were imposed on the 27th of August. And that's because of India continuing to buy Russian oil. So what does this indicate? 50% plus tariffs, the steepest on a trading partner. What does this mean? Let's try and make sense of these developments. Joining me on this India First special broadcast, our Ambassador Vivek Karjo, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, and he's been our Ambassador to Afghanistan. Craig Kafura is Director Public Opinion and Foreign Policy at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. And in a moment, I'll be joined by my colleague Sandeep Punithan for more on this big story. Ambassador Karju, you've been our Ambassador to Afghanistan. Trump is seeking that Bagram airbase again, and he's revoking the sanctions exemption given to India for Chabahar port. Now, do you see this as a negotiations lever ahead of forward movement on the trade deal, or do you see, is there more to it than meets the eye?
Before I answer your question, let me say this, that it is one thing to make statements on nationally on positions which are bilateral, and it's quite another thing to make them in a UNGA speech. Today, he has upped the ante exponentially. And India, at this crucial stage, when Jaishankar is there, when Piyush Goyal is also there to negotiate the trade deal, I think the first decision that they will have to take is whether they exercise the right of reply, which is that whether some Indian diplomat will at some stage today say that the war, the India-Pakistan clash, Operation Sindoor, was ended on Indian terms bilaterally. That will be a test of the Modi government's resolve. That is the first point. And the second point, will we say that as far as oil is concerned, we will continue to buy Russian oil or buy oil from any source that is in conformity with our interests? This is a very delicate moment for Indian diplomacy. And I would hate to be in the position of the two ministers, especially in Jaishankar's position today, because if we place this on record in the United Nations, then it will stay there forever. And it would mean that in the UN, we have refuted the US president's statements. So that is a first dilemma that our diplomats will face, and indeed our political leadership will also face at the highest level. Now, second, coming to your specific question, Well, I've seen that the Taliban have said that there's no question of their handing over Bagram to the US. In response, Trump has indicated that he has levers. I don't know what kind of levers he's talking about, because he is the one who withdrew
Yes.
from Afghanistan and accepted a humiliating defeat, strategic defeat at the hands of the Taliban, aided by Pakistan in the forever war. So I, for one, do not see how he can, in the face of Taliban intransigence, hope to
Okay.
get Bagram. Even if, now this is my last point, even if he were to offer them diplomatic recognition, which of course the Russians have, but I don't see that happening easily. As far as Chabahar is concerned, he is of course squeezing us. It is in conformity with what he has done on H-1B visas, on tariffs, and on Chabahar. So it's part of the same continuum. He will, Gaurav, mind you, he will not be satisfied with getting
Yes.
relief, getting his way only on the trade deal. He'll also want us to bend on Russian purchase of Russian oil. And
Okay.
my fear is that he might want his appetite whetted. He might want more, and you
Okay.
know what I mean when I say might want more. So this is a
Yes.
very difficult time for us diplomatically.
Craig Kafura, how do you look at all that Donald Trump is saying, especially after India had made it very clear he had no role to play whatsoever in bringing about the ceasefire between India and Pakistan? If he spoke to Pakistan and got Pakistan to speak to India for a ceasefire, that's for him to clarify. But does that put India-US relations in a very difficult situation right now? Because India may have to, or perhaps would have to, exercise the right to reply and refute him.
So I think you framed it earlier as mixed signals from Washington, and I think that's right. So you've identified these three different things that all affect India, right? You've got the increased tariffs because of Russian oil purchases. You've got the Chabahar port revocations, and you've got the H-1B changes. But I suspect that all of those have come out of different sources and different policy processes, right? We've seen previously that U.S. immigration policy and U.S. trade and security policies are not talking to each other, right? We saw this in the Hyundai plant raid in Georgia, right? South Korea agreed to invest huge amounts of money. They just closed a deal with the U.S. They're going into negotiations on other issues, but that seems to have been a completely unrelated raid that has really tanked U.S.-South Korea relations. I suspect that the Trump administration did not even think of the impacts on U.S.-India relations when it decided to make H-1B changes. On the Chabahar port, same thing. I suspect they thought only about how do we pressure Iran more. And I say this because, as far as I can tell, a lot of the interagency processes, a lot of the things that would normally characterize U.S. policymaking have sort of just fallen apart under the Trump administration, right? Different parts of the government are not necessarily talking to each other. They're not necessarily coordinating policies. They aren't thinking of second order effects that their decisions are making. I think the one where things really are about US-India are the tariffs for Russian oil purchases. And I'm not convinced that Donald Trump cares that much at his core about Russian oil purchases. I think this is motivated almost purely out of spite for Modi not lavishing him in praise for whatever he happened to do with the India-Pakistan conflict. And you can see him bringing it up again today at the UN, listing all of these wars that he claims to have solved, going on for so long and saving so many lives. How much involvement do you really think he had in any of those wars ending? He seems to just be
Okay.
openly campaigning for a Nobel Peace Prize and wanting to see which leaders are going to go along with him, which leaders will bend the knee and sort of abase themselves before him.
Before I bring in Sandeep, Ambassador, do you want to quickly respond to that point that various agencies in the United States of America may be working in silos, and the three things, the H-1B visa, the increased tariffs, and all of that he's saying, they may not be interlinked?
Gaurav, it is 101 of practical diplomacy that I learned, that it doesn't matter what the internal processes of a country are. That is for that country to decide. What matters is how my interests are being harmed. And if in each case, at the level of the Prime Minister, we have pointed out how our interests are being damaged, and the Trump administration takes the plea that one arm doesn't speak to another arm and there is no coherence, there's no communication, then what am I supposed to do?
Yep.
How am I supposed to respond? As far as I'm concerned, I'm not concerned. My damage is coming from which direction of the United States administration. What concerns me is that my interests are being damaged, and that the White House, which is supposed to coordinate policy in any government, it is the top leadership which coordinates policy, and I find this facile to say that the chief of staff, that the national security advisor are not in a position to coordinate different aspects of US policy, and that they are not able to present in a coherent fashion these elements to the president.
Okay.
Of course
Let me
they
get
are.
Sandeep Puneethan.
These are excuses, and these excuses we should just simply brush aside.
Okay, let me bring in Sandeep Puneethan, because the 2018 waiver for Chabahar port held India in good stead. How do you see Trump administration revoking the exemption quietly ahead of trade talks, unless these are levers being pressed to extract the maximum bang for their buck for the US?
Absolutely, Gaurav. There's no doubt about it. Every lever that can be pulled, every lever that can be pushed to pressurize India has already been pushed. We've seen that over the last couple of days. Of course, Chabahar was the final act. They've done everything, the kind of rhetoric. And, Gaurav, to give you an analogy of how the entire US, negotiation style has been, it's like, a military assault. First, you have the artillery, the heavy artillery, and then the tanks move in, and then finally the infantry moves in. And the infantry here is the trade delegations. And before that, you've seen this unparalleled bombardment on social media with all of Trump's acolytes coming and hitting out at India, at our buying of Russian oil. The kind of language that we've seen, Gaurav, is something that we have not seen coming out of the United States in a very long time. Some people say
dead
this
economy, laundromat, the kind of terminology they're using.
Is it 1998? Is it 1971? I'm not quite sure. The kind of language that's coming out, and Trump is singularly responsible for setting India-US relations back by a quarter of a century. And I've spoken to some of Ambassador Karju's colleagues, and they tell me, my question to them is, why is India playing it so calm? Why is it, so measured in the statements that are coming out? And they said, look, whatever we say now is going to echo decades from now, right? We have a responsibility to ensure that this is the kind of line that India took, and it was, respected, and the world has taken note of it, Gaurav. The language that India has used in these last couple of weeks in the face of very great provocation from the United States has been outstanding. And
you say that we've been set back, if it's either by 25 years, if it's back to 98, or by 50 years, if we go back to 71. Correct, Kafura? US action so far, including going soft on Pakistan, indicates that this comprehensive strategic partnership is not valued by the US president much. Of course, he didn't care for allies like the EU or Japan or South Korea, but do you see more headwinds in India-US relations? Because in India, the assessment, at least of the strategic community or the civil society, is this relationship is not important for President Trump at all.
I mean, you're right. He doesn't really seem to care about U.S. relationships with other allies and partners. Look at how he treated the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Europeans. I think you're accurate to say that he doesn't value the strategic aspect of this relationship. I think he's really reacting at a personal level, right? His personal relationship with Modi and how that's gone and how that's evolved. I do also think the other factor here is, how does Trump's relationship with Xi evolve in his second term? Because the other way that this can turn around for the U.S. India relationship is for Trump to have a falling out with Xi. If they don't get along, if relations between the U.S. and China sour, Trump likely to turn around, reverse all the previous statements, right? You have to remember also, Trump says a lot of things, does not hold a lot of very deep beliefs on most issues. So as bad as things are now, if the wind changes 6 months from now, he could be in a completely different position. But I agree with the ambassador. It is not India's job to deal with the problems of internal U.S. policymaking. You may have to connect the dots in some meetings, though. You may have to line things up and explain to your American counterparts, hey, all of these different things are having this series of effects, and this is how we're seeing it from our side.
Okay.
And I say that simply.
Okay. Ambassador Kaju, do you see more headwinds ahead? Because there are already reports from the US that suggest Trump may be looking at that OPT program, or that optional practical training program, which permits students to work during and after their studies. There's a new bill that aims to end the OPT program and then put a tax on the earnings from OPT program. There's also a proposed 3.5% tax on foreign remittances by non-citizens to the US. That too could adversely impact India, will adversely impact Indians there.
Look, at the end of the day, all my experience has taught me that countries look at who can harm them more than who can help them. Why is Trump a little wary of China? Because China has leverages against the United States. Even at a personal level, if his ties with Xi break down, he's a smart man. Unless he was a smart man, he could not have been in the position he is in. He is a very egoistical man. But that's a separate thing. He is smart, no doubt. And he realizes how China can damage him. His allies, Japan, the EU allies, can't harm him in that way. So he treats them with disdain. We can't harm him today. China can. And that is what he is respecting. And that is what he is responding to.
Okay. Sandeep, is this an opportunity for India, as Amitabh Kant, India's G20 Sherpa put it? He said words to the effect, by slamming the door on global talent, America pushes the next wave of labs and patents and innovations and startups in Indian cities, Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Pune, Gurgaon. Would that be an apprehension in the US or in Trump's thinking, or not at all?
Well, to some extent, yes, Gaurav. And, I agree with what Amitabh Kant said, because in India, we don't move until we've got a jolt. And we've seen that the greatest example of that was in 1991, liberalization. We moved to liberalize the economy only when our gold reserves had to be flown out to the United Kingdom. And this is possibly our 1991 moment again. A lot of people have been saying that the kind of pressure that we are facing from the United States over tariffs and other issues. This is the moment for India to actually make good of that Atmanirbhar Bharat slogan that we've been hearing for so long. And all these other slogans, Gaurav, ease of doing business and all that. You just talk to the businessmen and they'll tell you how they have to actually put in a lot of grease for doing business, and it's not so much of ease. So, things like this, it's time for us to wake up and make it easier for Indian businesses to stand up and make a difference. And, whether it is high technology issues like, fighter jet engines, fifth generation fighter aircraft, we need special programs. There are those templates. We have done it with the nuclear submarine project, for instance.
Yes.
When we've had the kind of laser focus of the PMO, we need to do it with all of these other programs as well. So this is, I think, our moment, and it is for us to, completely lose it. So this is a moment
so
that.
In this, if we look at it, crack of Kafura, if India were to look at this opportunity and an adversity, do you see this put massive damage, lasting damage on India-US relations?
It could, depending on how long this lasts. And I do think that the damage, especially on H-1Bs, on if the OPT program is ended, I think the people-to-people ties is where the damage is really going to be most severe if it lasts for more than a couple of years. And I'd be really curious to see if that OPT decision ends up going through, given how much Silicon Valley relies on students who are fresh out of universities, fresh out of PhD training programs, on those OPTs to build those first products, to work with those startup companies. If Silicon Valley doesn't revolt over this, I don't know what they'd revolt over. This would be immensely damaging to their interests.
Okay, I will let that be the last word of this part of the show, but that's a story we'll be tracking very closely. To my guests, many thanks for joining me.